talk today about the admin tab, and that is where we start focusing our management configuration on. This is divided in a certain amount of different things, and these are really different from each other. So, for example, things you can skip are like the capability catalog, because this is just all the stuff that is supported by this particular software version, for example. What kind of Blade service am I able to install in this software version? So I don't really care about this in the lab. I'm going to assume this is okay. How many port licenses are installed? Well, in my case, I have 8 licenses and I'm using 7, so I'm good to go on my licenses. Time zone. This is a very strange place where I would configure my time synchronization. So in my case, let's continue with some additional types, areas that we can configure stuff. So in this case, stats management. This is where I configure all those thresholds that we talked about earlier. So setting Ethernet port thresholds, setting temperature thresholds, setting all kinds of thresholds. That's done here under stats management. Did the Blade server finally boot from SAN? Well, it did. But the OS is not installed on the disk. So maybe it's a good time to, do I have some ISO image on this server? I don't think so, no. Let me see, while we are talking, let me upload a ESXi image to this server. And then see what we can do. If I have such an ISO image. Now I have one. Give me a minute. Alright, so I have this now on my laptop and I just need to copy it first to the server that I'm using to access the UCS manager, because this is a little bit slower connection. So VMware, VMvisor. So that's going to copy it over, and that's going to take approximately 15 minutes, I think. It's going to go a little faster. 20 minutes. Okay. Let's wait for this, and then when we can start mounting this ISO. And when I mount the ISO, I'm going to start the installer, and during the installation wizard, I will be given the option to install it on a certain disk. And you will see that that will be the disk that I found through iSCSI. So give this a couple minutes to be transported, and we'll start mounting the ISO and start booting the server and see if we can install the OS not on the local disks, but on the iSCSI bus. So we'll come back to that. Alright, so moving along with the management features. Like I said, stats management are my threshold policies. I'm not very interested in them right now. I showed you them earlier. It's just a very extensive configuration and just knowing exactly what kind of values that I expect there. This is not going to be a point where the lab is going to focus on. The lab will focus on other management stuff. Will not focus on key management. Those are my HTTPS certificates, but I don't care about them either. So what I care about is time zone management, I care about user management, and I care about settings here, false events and logs and stuff. So first, let's talk about NTP. Here we can assign the time zone. So I am currently in Europe, and I'm in Amsterdam, so that matches right away. So this is my current time zone. Save the change. And now I can add a NTP server. So I configured an NTP server at 10.10.210.141, and I should be able to access that server. which I can. That's good. So this is my NTP server. Edit, save change. Oh, it doesn't have to be even. So this is actually all I can do for NTP. Now the problem is verification. So it says this is configured, but the problem is verification. How will I know for sure that the time is synchronized right now? Now, it will at some point start synchronizing the time. The problem is that I'm not sure when. So it's just waiting. If you see an error message here or not, then everything is good, but at some point it will start synchronizing time. If I go into CLI on the server, maybe I can see it there. No, it's not going to show anything. Oh yeah, it does. Show NTP statistics. This not distributed, but show NTP session. No, that's the distributed session. Show NTP. There we go. So we currently are polling it in client mode, but we did not select the server for synchronization yet. That's what it says here. So this is taking some time. So this is a good place to verify if my NTP configuration is working. So it is selected, or it's going to be polled in client mode. It sees that it is a Stratum 1. But I did not synchronize with it yet. So this can take a lot of time. And I do see that I exchanged some packets, but I do not see any call synchronization. But we'll come back to that maybe later, see if it's synchronized. But the server is configured, that's all I can do. So I cannot do this wrong, right? If they want you to configure an NTP server in the lab, they will tell you the address, you're good. Next, DNS servers. So the easy stuff. Specify DNS servers. That's also going to be my 10.10.210.141. I can access a DNS server. Domain names and stuff are configured elsewhere. Call home. Call home is a Cisco specific feature related to ensuring that some communication between your system and Cisco TAG is in place. So what it will do is it will email either you, or it can email Cisco TAG directly with some diagnostic information. Call home, I wouldn't be too scared of, because they will probably just tell you a lot of this information. So what is the email address of the primary contact? What is the SMTP server address that I need to use to email all those call home messages from? What kind of profile do I want to use? So profiles are, what kind of information do I put into the alert? And here I can set things like diagnostics, inventories, all kinds of other things. And then I can say, do I want a special XML file for call home, or just something that I can read, so full text, or maybe a short version of that text. And of course, if I want to send traffic to Cisco TAG, I only say alert group Cisco TAG, and I say the XML format, because that's how the Cisco TAG email address will respond to it. But here I can just say, I want, if something happens, I want to have all kinds of information in the full text message emailed to me. Then I can say, when do you want to send this? Or maybe in case of certain problems. So some hardware failed, some equipment came offline, I have a power management failure, I have a license failure, or I have all kinds of other failures in my system that I want to use to start a call home message from. That is the first part. And I can say, all right, I want periodically, I want to send the system inventory sent to me. So this is for my install base management. I can say, all right, send me the inventory to all the call home receivers every now and then. So every 7 days. So all kinds of settings you can set here. I wouldn't expect for the lab, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of difficulty here. They will just say which checkboxes you need to check, and you need to make sure that you click the right checkboxes. For call home, that is. So that's call home. Then the IP pool for management we talked about, that is my IP address to access the KVM over IP session, for example, or to access the CIMC. So communicating between the Fabric Interconnect and the CIMC is going to use this particular IP address. My management interface is of course just the management interface of the UCS manager, of the UCS Fabric Interconnect. It's running in cluster mode. What is the virtual IP address? Here I set my domain names for DNS, and here I set my physical IP addresses. Now there is a certain monitoring policy, meaning that if I enable that, I can start pinging all kinds of targets or pinging the default gateway. So this means when I cannot access my default gateway or when I cannot access certain targets, I will raise an alarm. So I will raise an alarm on my management interface saying, hey, I cannot access my default gateway anymore. Chances are that if you cannot ping your default gateway anymore, your management interface will not be able to send any alarms out, right? So you will not see the alarm. But in either case, it will raise an alarm if certain things happen to the management interface. Next are communication services, and this is a big window. This window, here I am configuring everything related to my management protocols. Meaning here I configure as an MP, here I do not configure syslog here, but here I configure anything how I access the UCS. And you can expect some settings here to do in the lab. So what can I configure? Well, first of all, I can enable Telnet. So by default only SSH is enabled, and I can maybe allow Telnet to be enabled. That can be a requirement. That's going to be done here at Communication Services. Next, do I want to open up a special XML interface, the CIM XML, that's going to run on port 5988, so a special Cisco protocol for an XML interface. Do I enable port 80? Do I enable unprotected or unencrypted web traffic? If I do I always want to redirect from unencrypted to an encrypted portal? Yes. Or if I just want to enable unencrypted access to my UCS manager, I disable the redirect here. And of course, I can enable HTTPS. So do I want to, this is also by default enabled, as is the redirection, that's also by default enabled. For HTTPS, same thing. Do I enable it or disable it? What kind of certificate do I use? So in that keyring specification or in that key management part, I can copy and paste my certificates and then use these in the HTTPS communication. Then on top of here, I can limit the amount of management sessions to the web portal I can set. So this is a very big number. So there can be a maximum of 256 sessions of UCS Manager at the same time. That's a lot, right? These are my line VTYs on their Cisco routers. That is the maximum sessions command here. And then I can also set a limit of sessions per user. It's not very cryptical. It's just do what the question tells you. Then lastly, we have our SNMP configuration, and that is what it makes interesting. So first of all, SNMP is disabled by default. Cisco wants you to go to the XML interface that they programmed and say, hey, you can do system monitoring on the XML interface as well. But 99% of the companies that I work with, they want to use SNMP for their monitoring. So normal SNMP v2c community strings. That's what I type in here. So this is just my SNMP v2 community string. That's what I enter here. The nexuses are pretty much based on SNMP v3. So that's why you also see most configuration done related to SNMP v3. But it does support v2c, so version 2 in a classic form as well. And here is where I configure that community string. Now these are some clear text fields for saying who is the contact and what is the location. That is in our case China, Michigan. So to locate the system as well. Then community strings are used to read from the system. I cannot do read-write here, just read only, by the way. No read-write SNMP. I can create traps. What are traps? These are just push messages from the system as soon as an alarm or an event is happening. I will forward that event as an SNMP trap to my management system. So that is a proactive message to the management system. So first of all, I need to configure what is the IP of that system. So I don't have an SNMP server in my network, but what is the IP address? What is the community string for v2c or the username for SNMP v3 to send the trap off? So that's also CCIE-DC. Do I want to send that as a v2c or as a v3? Well, in my case, v2c. If I specify v3, I can specify if I want to do authentication or even encryption on the traffic. I'm going to stick to v2c. And here I can say, do I want to send traps or informs? Where the main difference is that traps are unidirectional, UDP messages. So just, here is my trap, there you go. And an inform waits for an acknowledgement of the management system. So the management system will acknowledge the trap, and that is called an inform. Usually you will just use traps. And now for every alarm that the system raises, I will forward that towards a management system based on SNMP traps. Then finally, if I'm using SNMP v3 to access the system, I use username passwords, and I no longer use community strings. I use usernames passwords to access the device via SNMP. So here I can specify a username that can access the SNMP stack in the UCS manager. So okay, how is it going to authenticate via MD5 or via SHA hashing? I'm going to specify a password. In my case, IPExpert123, confirm that. And additionally to authentication using a hashed password, I can also do encryption of the traffic. So I can fully encrypt all the SNMP traffic using either triple DES or AES. If I want to use AES, I'm going to check the checkbox and I'm going to set maybe the same password or a different password. So this is my encryption key for the encryption password. So the password is sent in a hashed algorithm, and the encryption is using symmetrical encryption, meaning same key. I configure the same key on both sides of my configuration. So usually these are the same keys, but I can configure them separately. And I'm done. And that is my SNMP configuration. Not deeply technical, but still pay attention to this, as they can ask you a lot of things. But it's just follow the right steps. They will tell you exactly the settings that you need to set. Where is the SNMP server located? What's the IP address? What's the community string? What's the v3 username? All kinds of stuff. Last thing that I want to talk about is syslog. So first of all, in this particular section of the configuration, I configure everything related to alarms and log messages. With two exceptions, and these are tech support files and core dump files. Tech support files, there is a statement on the CCIE Data Center Blueprint that you need to know how to collect technical support information for Cisco TAC on the system. Well, it's not a very cryptical description that this is used for that. And here I say, all right, create a tech support file. That's probably what they will ask you, because this will generate a tar file or a zip file with all kinds of logging about the whole system. So do I want to know everything there is to know about this particular UCS? Do I just want information about the UCS manager? Do I want to know things about the chassis, a specific chassis? Maybe even an I/O module or a CIMC? Do I want to have information regarding a specific fabric extender or an I/O module in the back of the chassis? Or is there a rack server that I want to have some information from? Usually, I would want to have information regarding everything there is to know in the system. And this will start creating that, and that will take some time. And then if it's done, I can click this arrow, which is grayed out at the moment, because it's not ready yet. So here I can then download that information onto my machine. So this is how I create Cisco TAC information that I need to send to them. And you can specify what is the scope of that. Now, core dump files, if a fabric interconnect crashes, it will generate a core dump. And that core dump is just a dump of all the memory towards a zip file, and that zip file can be downloaded and uploaded to Cisco TAC as well. Then, the events and faults are just the log messages that I have. And then the settings will determine how much time, in how much intervals do I scan for faults. So if I retain or delete an action, I can set some things here. How long do I want to have the log message after it has been cleared? How long do I want to keep that in my log file? All kinds of those settings. An important thing here is those core files that you saw here are just generated once something fails. If that happens, I can automatically export them via TFTP right from the CIMC towards the TFTP server. So this is a special feature just for core dumps. The core dumps will be stored on the Fabric Interconnect, and they can be immediately exported towards a certain TFTP server if you wanted to. And then finally we have our syslog settings, where we can enable the forwarding of certain faults in the system, and then forward that to certain servers or even to local log files. So if you're familiar with Cisco CLI, so a terminal monitor, so logging console and logging monitor, I can enable those here. So console logging means which errors do I want to report right away to the CLI. So if something happens right now, then immediately check what happens. Then I immediately get that log message in my CLI shown. Usually, because this is a GUI interface, this is just disabled, but I can enable that. Monitor is used for information immediately shown on SSH sessions towards the CLI. But again, I manage this through a GUI, so it will definitely not be a case that they can ask you about this. But if they do, here you enable console logging or SSH logging, and I can specify which severity of faults that I want to report to my CLI. I'm going to leave that disabled for now. And as you can see on the console, because that is a 9600 bits per second interface, the amount of logging that I can alert there is very limited. So I cannot do debugging, for example, on the console. only on SSH. And of course, this is enabled because this is my log message, so just my show log message on the CLI called messages. Now what I want to do is what is a good question for the lab is forward certain syslog messages, so ensure that critical messages are forwarded to a certain syslog server. That is done here. So I can have a maximum of 3 servers that I export things to, server 1, 2, and 3. And per server I configure both the level of detail that I want to get, so critical error messages are the ones with the red cross. The errors are the exclamation mark or the triangle here upside down. Warnings is the triangle right up, and notifications is the green triangle. So that warning, minor, major, critical, that's also here. Minor, warning, minor, major, critical. And then the others are just syslog levels. So the higher you get, the higher I get into detail, the lower I get on this list. So emergencies are really system down issues. Those are usually critical messages right away. So a power failure, a blade crashed, or all kinds of other things, those are critical errors. Link failures on Vnix or anything else, so link failures are errors, major alarms. And the further I go down, so notifications, meaning if I set the level to notifications, so meaning the green triangle, not only do I get notifications, but I also get notified about minors, warnings, and criticals. So the further down I go into the level of detail, all of that information that is of higher importance will also be sent. So it's not that I'm just sending notifications, no, I'm sending notification and everything above here. And of course I can do that. So let's say I have a debugging syslog server, I forward everything that I have to that. And this is facilities, or is also a syslog protocol thing. I can set a certain facility and filter on that on my syslog server.